Welcome back to the ancient world. Last episode, we explored the rise of Sargon's Akkadian Empire and the fall of the Minoans to a volcanic catastrophe. We learned that every great story has a dramatic end. But what if the greatest structure ever built was erected during a time of perfect stability? This week, we turn to ancient Egypt during the Old Kingdom. This was the age of Pharaoh Khufu and the genius Imhotep, the era that built the Great Pyramid of Giza, a monument so immense it remained the tallest structure on Earth for over 4 millennia. We will unveil the secrets of the bent pyramid and the engineering marvels that defined their civilization. Yet, even this golden age was not immune to collapse. We will track the slow decay of power, the rise of local warlords, and the devastating regional drought that fragmented the kingdom, bringing the age of the pyramids to an abrupt end. Then, we journey to the east, to the organized, sanitary Indus Valley Civilization, the civilization without kings, and the mythical beginnings of ancient China under Yu the Great. Ready to find out what caused the collapse of the greatest kingdom of the ancient world? The ancient world begins now. The third Egyptian dynasty started in 2650 BC with 2 brothers, Sennacht, who was in charge for 18 years, and Djoser, who took over after him. It's not totally clear why this change marks the start of a new dynasty, since both brothers were supposedly sons of Khafre, the last ruler of the previous dynasty. But I'm not going to argue with Manetho. Anyway, Djoser is remembered as the first Egyptian ruler to send military expeditions to the Sinai Peninsula. This area was important to the early Egyptians because it had a lot of valuable minerals, especially turquoise and copper. It also served as a buffer zone between the Nile Valley and the early civilizations of the Near East. Inscriptions from this time found in Sinai show the banner of Seth next to symbols of Horus. This suggests that Djoser was continuing his father's plan to bring together the opposing power centers of Upper and Lower Egypt. Djoser also pushed Egypt's borders as far south as Aswan, the first cataract of the Nile, which later became Egypt's official southern boundary. Just so you know, since they come up a lot when talking about Egypt, cataracts are sections of the river with shallow whitewater rapids. Large ships can't get through them easily, so they act as natural borders that limit how far Egyptian power can reach. Being able to control this cataract or that one often became a way to measure how strong a particular ruler was going forward. Even with his military success, Djoser's biggest impact was in building big, impressive structures. The tombs of officials from previous dynasties are located on the edge of the plateau at Saqqara, near the capital of Memphis. They were built in the style of mastabas, which is Arabic for bench. These were low, flat, and rectangular structures. Djoser decided to break with the tradition of kings building their tombs at Abydos and chose to build at Saqqara instead. He also decided to move his funeral monument back from the edge of the plateau by about a mile. There, in 2630 BC, he built a grand complex that was an architectural first, the famous Step Pyramid of Saqqara. This complex, which is recognized as the first monumental building in the world made entirely of stone, was the creation of Imhotep, Djoser's vizier, treasurer, administrator, and high priest, as well as its architect. In Egypt, Imhotep's power and importance were second only to Djoser's. The basic structure of the Step Pyramid is made up of 6 mastabas, each smaller than the one below it, stacked on top of each other. This creates a series of uneven steps that rise over 200 feet. Near the entrance to the complex is a box-like structure with 2 small holes for looking inside. Inside this structure was a painted, life-size, seated figure of Djoser, which is the oldest known royal sculpture of its kind in Egypt. The construction of the Step Pyramid tells us a few things about Egypt under Djoser's rule. He was able to gather a large workforce to complete a huge project in a relatively short time, around 20 years. Also, the Egyptian government at that time was stable and organized enough to manage the work and feed the workers. Djoser's funeral complex is the start of a long line of Egyptian stone architecture. Inside it, you can see the beginnings of many later building forms and styles, although they're still in an experimental stage. These forms and styles would be copied and improved over the next 2,000 years. At first glance, and sometimes even at second glance, the step pyramid of Djoser looks a lot like the ziggurat-style temples of ancient Sumer. Since I didn't get around to talking about ziggurats last time, now seems like a good time to do it. While temples were present in Sumerian cities as early as 5300 BC, the ziggurat style wasn't used until the 3rd dynasty of Ur, around 2100 BC. One of the most famous ziggurats, and possibly the first, was the one built by Ur-Nammu and dedicated to the moon god Nana, the patron deity of Ur. This means the Sumerians were about 500 years behind the Egyptians in building these kinds of stepped monuments. If you dig a little deeper, you'll find other important differences. The ziggurats of Sumer were built of mud brick, while the first Egyptian pyramids were built entirely of stone, which is much more durable. This difference reflects the different resources available in each region. The two structures also had completely different purposes in their cultures. Sumerian ziggurats were religious structures that were thought to be the dwelling place of each city's patron god. They were usually part of a larger temple complex that included a courtyard, storage rooms, and living areas. Ziggurats also served as high places for priests to go to when floodwaters rose. Because they had limited access points, they were also secure locations where priests could perform ritual sacrifices in private. In contrast, Egyptian pyramids were exclusively for funerals, which highlights how important the afterlife was in their culture. Besides being the first Egyptian pyramid builder, Djoser's time was also when Egyptian artwork first started showing the king in the formal clothing and symbols that he would wear for the next few thousand years. This included the cobra-like Nemes headdress, the false beard, and the fancy kilt. Another feature of later Egyptian culture, the civil service, which was basically an extension of the royal household, had also developed by this time. The most important official was the vizier, who oversaw the collection of taxes and the administration of justice. Below the vizier was a staff of chancellors, quartermasters, and scribes. For local government, Egypt was divided into provinces called nomes, which were governed by nomarchs from noble or royal families. Sekhemkhet, Djoser's successor, apparently tried and failed to build his own step pyramid that would have been one step higher. However, he died before it was finished, and its unfinished remains were left in the desert. The last two rulers of the 3rd dynasty, Kaba and Huni, also tried to build pyramids. Kaba built his near Giza, while Huni built his at Meidum, on the edge of the Fayum Oasis, about 50 miles south of modern Cairo. Huni's pyramid, which was intended to be the first geometrically true pyramid, served as the prototype for the standard layout of a pyramid complex. This included a pyramid with a north-facing entrance that led through a descending passage to a burial chamber located in the bedrock or at ground level within the pyramid itself. A small pyramid that served as a mortuary temple to the east, and a causeway that extended from the mortuary temple to the edge of the cultivated land, where a second, smaller valley temple was located. Huni, who apparently rose to the throne from a position as a high official in Djoser's court, is also known for establishing a fortress on the island of Elephantine in Aswan to protect Egypt's southern border at the First Cataract. He also built a small ceremonial pyramid at Elephantine, but its purpose is unknown. The 4th dynasty was started by Sneferu, who married Huni's daughter. During his time as ruler, Sneferu led several military expeditions beyond Egypt's established borders. From Lebanon, he got the cedar logs needed to build temple doors and large ships. From Libya and Nubia, he captured slaves for his construction projects. as well as cattle to feed his large workforce. He also continued to take advantage of the mineral wealth of Sinai, as his predecessors had done. Sneferu continued to develop pyramid architecture through two projects, both built at the new site of Dahshur, about 20 miles south of modern Cairo. The first effort is known as the Bent Pyramid. It has a strange feature where the angle of the sides suddenly becomes much less steep about halfway to the top, possibly suggesting some kind of construction problem during building. Either way, it looks pretty wonky. So, not to be discouraged, Sneferu tried again. His second attempt was much more successful. It resulted in the creation of the Red Pyramid, the first true Egyptian pyramid and the model, with a slight change in the angle of the sides. For all later pyramid construction, Sneferu's son Khufu, also known as Cheops, inherited a strong and stable kingdom with a lot of resources and people at his disposal. So, when it came to his funeral monument, Khufu went big. I mean, really big. I mean, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one still standing today. Big. Of course, I'm talking about the Great Pyramid. Built in 2550 BC from about 2,300,000 stone blocks, each weighing about 212 tons, the pyramid rose and still rises, 480 feet above the Giza Plateau, southwest of modern Cairo. In case you're not already amazed, how about this? The Great Pyramid was the tallest man-made building in the world for the next 4,500 years. For you trivia fans, its height was finally exceeded by Lincoln Cathedral in England in 1311 AD. Although I think that building kinda cheated by including a spire. Also, even to this day, we don't know exactly how the Great Pyramid was built. Khufu was followed by his sons Jedefre and Khafre, also known as Sefren. Khafre built the second pyramid at Giza, as well as the Great Sphinx. The Sphinx was apparently carved from a limestone rock outcrop that was left after the blocks for the nearby Great Pyramid were quarried. The Giza necropolis was completed by Khafre's son Menkaure, also known as Mycerinus, who built the third and smallest pyramid. This might show internal political problems during his rule, or reflect a cultural shift from worshipping the ruler to a more general worship of the sun god Ra. The last ruler of the 4th dynasty was Shepseskaf, and the unremarkable mortuary temple he left at Saqqara is another sign that the 4th dynasty was declining after the great heights of Khufu's reign. Userkaf, the first ruler of the 5th dynasty, took power around 2500 BC and then built the first Egyptian sun temple. It contained a short, stubby obelisk that was a forerunner to the much taller versions built centuries later during the Egyptian New Kingdom. His son and successor, Sahura, is credited with establishing an Egyptian navy. He sent a fleet to Punt, modern Somalia, and traded with the early cultures of the Eastern Mediterranean. His pyramid, built in Abu Sir, north of Saqqara, had colonnaded courts, relief sculptures showing his fleet, and inscriptions recording his military campaigns against the Libyans of the Western Desert. The rule of Sahure's son and successor, Neferkare, was unusual because there are many surviving records that describe him as a kind and gentle ruler. The 5th dynasty continued with several more fairly unremarkable rulers before finally ending with Unas, who didn't leave behind any sons. The 6th dynasty was started by Teti, who married Unas's daughter. Teti's son by Iput, named Pepi Yeters, was supposed to take over after him. But Userkare, Teti's other son by Queen Kuit, apparently didn't like that plan. Userkare decided to settle the succession issue early by leading a conspiracy against his father. This ended with Teti being murdered by his own bodyguards and Userkare taking the throne. Over the next few years, Pepi worked to get the support of powerful nobles in Upper Egypt. He finally got the backing he needed to overthrow his brother who had stolen the throne. Unfortunately, as payment for their support, these nobles demanded more independence for the Nomarchs, the local rulers of their region. This arrangement would cause problems for Pepi's 6th dynasty successors later on. This transfer of power to the provinces at the expense of the central authority of Memphis is seen as the beginning of the decline of the Old Kingdom. On the bright side, Pepi I was a prolific builder who oversaw extensive construction projects at Dendera, Abydos, Elephantine, and Nekhen. However, it probably didn't go unnoticed that these sites were all located in Upper Egypt, the home of his Nomarch allies. Pepi I was succeeded by Merenre and then Pepi II, who came to power at age 6 and ruled until he was 94. This makes him not just the longest ruling Egyptian king, but the longest reigning king of any time or place. Period. Pepi II's long rule was marked by continued trade with Lebanon and Nubia, and by the ever-increasing wealth and influence of nobles outside the royal court. The Nomarchs of Upper Egypt, in particular, began raiding each other's territories and building their own elaborate funeral monuments. All of this shows a general breakdown of central authority. With the fall of the 6th dynasty, on the death of Pepi II around 2200 BC, the Egyptian Old Kingdom came to an end. The 700 years between the pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom and the equally impressive dynasties of the New Kingdom are divided into 3 distinct periods: the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom, and the second intermediate period. During the first intermediate period, which includes the 7th through 10th ruling dynasties, the Egyptian central government completely broke down. This was likely due to the influence of powerful nobles, as well as the Nile entering a period of low flooding, which led to famine. As we talked about before, this may be the same regional drought that helped cause the collapse of the old Akkadian Empire at roughly the same time. The records of rulers and events during the first intermediate period are often sparse and contradictory. While the successors of Pepi II likely continued to rule in Memphis, they seemed to control little beyond the city and its immediate surroundings. The Nile Delta came under the control of unspecified Asiatics from the east. Local nomarchs and warlords competed for power elsewhere, sometimes controlling large areas of territory, other times dividing rule between rival dynasties in different regions. 2 main competing regions were Heracleopolis in Middle Egypt and Thebes, modern Luxor in Upper Egypt. Their forces often clashed near Abydos. Egypt would eventually be reunited under King Mentuhotep, founder of the 11th Egyptian dynasty. But we'll save his story for another time. Farther to the east, during the same period, a complex culture was also developing in the river valleys of ancient Pakistan. This regional civilization first appeared in the Indus River Valley and only later in the Ganges River Valley. Both were fertile areas watered by snowmelt from the mountains. But the wide floodplain of the Indus allowed for extensive irrigation, which led to the development of a well-organized society that was fed by agricultural surpluses. You're probably familiar with this kind of situation by now. The geography of the Indus Valley put the civilization that grew there in a similar situation to Egypt. It had rich agricultural land, surrounded by geographic buffers of highlands, desert, and ocean that prevented foreign invasion. But also, like Egypt, the Indus was close enough to the Middle East to trade with the civilizations of early Mesopotamia. By 2500 BC, cities that could rival the great urban centers of Sumer were developing along the Indus River and its tributaries. At least 3 cities in the region had populations of 30 to 40,000, making them comparable to the largest cities in Mesopotamia. The most important were Mohenjo-Daro on the lower Indus River and Harappa on the Ravi River, near the upper end of the Indus River Valley. This civilization is often called the Harappan civilization, since Harappa was the first city to be excavated in modern times. It's also called the Indus Valley Civilization, or just IVC for short. In addition to dozens, maybe even hundreds, of towns and villages throughout Pakistan, scattered IVC settlements have also been found in eastern Afghanistan, Bahrain, eastern Iran, western India, and even as far away as Turkmenistan. At its peak, the IVC may have had a population of well over 5 million. The IVC was rediscovered somewhat by accident in 1856 by British railway engineers. While looking for ballast to use in construction, they heard rumors of an ancient city in the area. They found many hard, well-burnt bricks that were perfect for their needs. They destroyed the first unnamed city they found almost entirely for this purpose. They also used many bricks from Harappa, the next nearby city they discovered, before finally stopping. Maybe they had all the bricks they needed. Or maybe they finally realized they were doing something really, really stupid. Both Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were built on a similar plan, with a gridwork of streets, standardized housing for the common people, and larger residences for the elite. The advanced public architecture of the Harappans is shown in their impressive dockyards. Granaries, warehouses, public buildings built on large brick platforms, and massive protective walls. These last two helped protect them from frequent floods, somewhat unusually for an ancient civilization. There is no clear evidence for the construction of palaces or temples, or for that matter of kings, armies, or priests. Although there are enough religious figurines to suggest at least some degree of priestly influence, unfortunately, many aspects of this important early civilization are still a mystery. The IVC also boasted the world's earliest known urban sanitation system, which included bathrooms connected to underground sewers. This was an important contribution to public health in cities of 40,000 people. The ancient sewers and drainage systems were much more advanced than those of contemporary urban sites in Mesopotamia, and sadly, even more efficient than those used in many areas of Pakistan and India today. Such large-scale development projects suggest a complex society where leaders controlled the labor of thousands under the guidance of engineers and other officials. As with other ancient civilizations, it's likely that grain surpluses supported the leadership and associated bureaucracy, as well as the development of skilled trades. Harappan civilization was mostly built on trade, connecting its cities to each other and the region as a whole to Mesopotamia and even more distant lands. Extensive caravan networks spread across much of Central Asia and the Persian Plateau. Harappan trading ships sailed along the coasts of the Arabian Sea, carrying trade goods to Ur and other Sumerian cities, often using middlemen in Dilmun, modern Bahrain, as well as possibly to Egypt, East Africa, and even Crete. Harappan merchants used distinctive seals to mark their goods, often showing animals native to India, such as the elephant and rhinoceros, along with other mythical animals. Some seals also used more abstract symbols. This is the only evidence of a possible written language that has come down to us. Nearly 400 different characters have been identified, but so far, none have been translated. The absence of royal palaces and the large numbers of religious figurines found at both Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro suggest a theocratic state of priests, merchants, and farmers. Harappan religion centered around fertility, including the worship of a mother goddess, as well as certain trees, especially the peepal, anticipating their sacred status in later Hindu and Buddhist traditions. In terms of science, the Harappans achieved great accuracy in measuring length, mass, and time, and were among the first civilizations to develop a uniform system of weights and measures. Their smallest division of length, equivalent to around 2 millimeters, is the smallest ever recorded from the Bronze Age. The engineering skill of the Harappans was remarkable, especially in their construction of docks, which shows a careful study of tides, waves, and currents. They also developed new techniques in metallurgy and handicrafts, produced copper, bronze, lead, and tin, and may have been the first to use wheeled transport. Their only possible competitor there is the Sumerians, which puts them in pretty good company either way. There's also evidence that the Harappans practiced an early form of dentistry, and I think we're just not going to dwell on that one since I'm already kind of cringing at the thought. Like other river valleys that fostered ancient civilizations, the Indus region was subject to seasonal flooding. This flooding nourished the fields, but could also sometimes be devastating to local construction. The city of Mohenjo-Daro had to be rebuilt at least 9 times. Ruinous floods, as well as the drying up of the important Sarasvati River, which supported much of the region's agriculture, may have contributed to the final decline of Harappan civilization after around 2000 BC. Over the next few hundred years, the area remained productive, but major cities were abandoned and long-distance trade died out, waiting for the region's next stage of cultural development with the arrival of the Aryan civilization from the north. But that's a story for another podcast. Now, let's travel even farther to the east, to another region of the world we haven't visited yet, and talk about the culture that grew in the 22nd century BC along the Yellow River in ancient China. Much like the early civilizations of the Americas, early Chinese civilization developed in relative isolation, separated from the emerging cultures of the Near East and India by mountains, deserts, and oceans. They called their realm the Middle Kingdom, not to be confused with the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, which we'll be talking about next episode. They saw it as a land of order and stability, surrounded by wilderness and chaos. The seeds of Chinese civilization were planted by 5000 BC. By this time, people were living in villages along the Middle Yellow River and its tributaries and practicing terrace farming. The Yellow River was named for the yellow loess, or silt, deposited along its banks by winds from the Gobi Desert. This loess provided fertile soil for growing millet, a local cereal crop. It was in the floodplain of the Yellow River, downstream from its first settlements, that people first joined together under strong leadership to dig ditches and drainage canals for irrigation and flood control. Chinese records credit a legendary ruler named Yu the Great of the Jia dynasty with finally taming the flood plain in the late 22nd century BC, marking the traditional beginning of Chinese civilization. According to ancient Chinese texts, Gun, the father of Yu, had previously spent 9 years trying to control the flooding of the rivers by building dikes and dams along the riverbanks. But his work was seen as a failure because the floods became stronger. The local king at the time was Shun, supposedly one of the semi-mythical 5 emperors of ancient China, all of whom were legendary sages of great moral character. Gun himself was supposedly the son of Zhuanshu, another of the 5 emperors. Despite their respective backgrounds, Shun had Gun executed for his failure. Gun's son, Yu, was appointed to finish his father's work. After carefully studying the problem, Yu decided to use a different approach. He convinced local tribes to help him build a network of irrigation canals, which diverted floodwaters into fields and also involved dredging riverbeds to help them flow more freely into the sea. Legend has it that he toiled on this project for a full 13 years without ever returning home. This is seen as symbolic of his extraordinary dedication and perseverance. He spent most of his time personally assisting with the work, even eating and sleeping alongside the common laborers. Over time, other tribes were inspired by his example and joined in his efforts. After 13 long years, Yu finally succeeded in stopping the floods, a monumental achievement that's memorialized in Chinese history as Great Yu controls the waters. The flood protection provided by the canal system boosted agricultural production and increased the sea tribes' influence. Yu soon became the leader of the local tribes. With the growth of agriculture came an increased population, the ability to store and redistribute crops, and the potential to support specialized craftsmen and administrators. all the standard hallmarks of a budding civilization. Not long after these developments, King Shun, the same ruler who had executed Yu's father for failure, sent Yu to lead an army to suppress the San Miao tribe, who were harassing other tribes living near the boundaries of his kingdom. Yu's success in defeating the San Miao further strengthened the Sea tribe's power and prestige. Shun, who was getting old, eventually decided to abdicate in favor of Yu, marking the beginning of the Xia dynasty. Upon ascending the throne at the age of 53, Yu established a new capital at Anyi and divided his kingdom into 9 provinces. Using bronze provided as tribute from these 9 territories, he supposedly created 9 tripod cauldrons, which were used to offer ritual sacrifices to the ancestors. Under the subsequent Shang dynasty, these 9 cauldrons were used on ceremonial state occasions to symbolize and reinforce the ruler's authority. Yuk ruled the Xia dynasty for 45 years before finally succumbing to an illness during a hunting trip to the eastern frontier of his kingdom and was supposedly buried there. Upon his death, Yu passed power to his son Qi, setting the precedent for dynastic rule. The Xia dynasty, which existed between approximately 2070 and 1600 BC, is the first dynasty described in ancient historical records. However, there are some doubts about whether this dynasty actually existed. Archaeological evidence from the period includes a bronze smelter from around 2000 BC, unearthed at Erlitou in central Henan province. The smelter has been alternately associated with either the Xia dynasty or the early stages of their successors, the Shang. Erlitou was also known to be home to the largest settlement anywhere in East Asia until around 1500 BC, and was clearly a royal center of some importance, containing 2 palace complexes. But again, it's unclear whether this city served the Xia or the Shang. In addition, early markings from this period found on pottery and shells, again either of Xia or early Shang origin, are believed to be ancestral to modern Chinese characters. So it's pretty evident that during this time, important advancements were being made in the development of Chinese civilization. Unfortunately, the general dearth of archaeological finds and clear written records means that this era of Chinese history is still poorly understood. Fortunately, the next ruling dynasty, the Shang, is far better documented. But we'll discuss that dynasty in a later podcast.